more money to invest? I see a hand back there. All right, another hand. All right. When I was a kid, my dad told me, I can still remember where we were standing when he told me this. He told me that if I would put away $1,000 a year for the rest of my life, that then when I turned 65, I would be a millionaire. And I thought, wow, that's what I should do. But of course, life intervenes, and there never seems to be an extra $1,000 laying around to invest in things. And maybe you've heard about the magic of compound interest. There's compounding interest calculators on the internet. You can put in, if I put in this amount of money and I could get this amount of interest, how long would it take for me to have X number of dollars or whatever? And the idea is that if you would put $20 a month away, just $20 a month at 10% interest in 65 years, due to compound interest, you would have $1.3 million. Amazing. I think we all would agree here, I'd be surprised if anyone would disagree with me, that investing now for the future are good things to do. Sometimes it doesn't happen because there's so many things in this world that are expensive and nice to buy, and life seems to intervene. But I think that we would all agree that a little bit set aside now to prepare for the future is a wise thing. And I would imagine we'd all agree with Jim Elliot here, who said, "He is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." Jim Elliot is one of the missionaries who was killed taking the gospel to the Auca Indians many years ago. Imagine if you worked for a manager who was a wealthy person, and they took you aside one day and said, "You're managing my accounts and my money and stuff. Feel free to take some of my money and invest it for yourself in your own name, and let that accumulate over the years. Feel free to do that. If you choose not to do that, then the money just is going to go away and remain in my account." I think we all would say, well, gee whiz, of course, take advantage of that and invest some of their money into for your own benefit. That would be a very wise thing to do. Well, that's a little bit like our parable today that we're going to take a look at. If you're joining us for the first time, we're in the middle of a sermon series on the parables of Jesus. So far, we've looked at the parable of the new wine and the new wine skins. We looked at the parable of the waiting servants. We also looked at, one week, the parable of the pearl of great price, one of my favorites. And then last week, we looked at the parable of the lost sheep. This week, we're going to look at a parable that is one of the most interesting and strange, confusing parables of all of Jesus' parables. I learned as I did research on this that many pastors and theologians just skip this parable because it's so strange and difficult to understand in some ways. This is the parable that the New International Version calls the parable of the shrewd servant, or the parable of the shrewd manager. Other Bible translations have different names for it. The Revised Standard Version calls it the parable of the dishonest manager. The Message Bible calls it the crooked manager. The Modern English Version calls it the dishonest steward. The King James Version calls it the parable of the unjust steward. And the New American Standard Version calls it the parable of the unrighteous steward. So you begin to get the idea of where this story is going to go. Let's take a look at the parable that we found in Luke 16, verses 1 through 8, if you want to look at those in the Pew Bible. I'm going to read it to you. This is kind of how the disciples would have heard it the first time, and then we'll go through it in a little bit here. But Jesus told his disciples, "There was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So far we've got two people in the story, right? We've got the rich man and his manager who's been accused of wasting his possessions. So he, the rich man, called him, the manager, in and asked him, "What does it say here about you? Give an account of your management, because you can no longer be the manager any longer." And the manager said to himself, "What should I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm too ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses." So he called in each one of his master's debtors, and he asked the first, "How much do you owe my master?" 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. And the manager told him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Then he asked the second one, "How much do you owe?" 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. So he told him, "Take out your bill and cross it out and make it 800. Oh man, if you thought this guy was in trouble before, right? Now he's the manager, the rich man is going to really give it to the manager, right? Well, look what he says in verse 8. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. Wow. I bet you didn't see that coming, right? You read that and you kind of go, what? Jesus, are you sure? No wonder pastors skip over this one. That doesn't make sense. Well, luckily for us, Jesus offers an explanation right after this. So let's pick that up in Luke 16, verses 8 through 13. We're going to put that on the screen for you. Jesus continued, he says, "For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light." Let that sink in for a minute. The people of the world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is done, this world, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. Verse 11, so if you have not been trustworthy in handling the worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one or love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Well, I think there are sort of three things we can pull out of here that Jesus is trying to get across to his disciples and to us. So let's take a look at Jesus' explanation. First of all, verses 8 and 9 says, Jesus says, "For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself." That's kind of an important phrase. Gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. The Bible Knowledge Commentary that I looked at had this take on it. It says, Jesus was not teaching his disciples that they should be dishonest. He was teaching that they should use material things for future spiritual benefit. This was a good lesson from a bad example. Warren Wiersbe, one of my favorite Bible commentators, said this: "The people of this world are much better at seeing opportunities and profiting from them than are the children of God." During this brief life, we have opportunity to use wealth to make friends for God, friends who will meet us in heaven. So the idea here is that people of this world are more shrewd in using their worldly, they're more shrewd in their worldly dealings than are the people of the light in their spiritual dealings. Let me say that again. The people of this world are more shrewd in their worldly dealings than are the people of the light in their spiritual dealings. This is not saying that we should be dishonest. It's not, hey, I know what you should do, is go bilk a bunch of people out of, something dishonestly, and then use that money for kingdom purposes. No, that's not what he's saying here. But we should seize opportunities that give us the ability to tell more people about Christ and tell them more effectively, so that one day we'll be greeted by them in heaven. I think this also includes shrewdly investing in kingdom activities and knowing that those activities will allow us to store up treasures in heaven. Kind of as my example at the beginning of my sermon where I said, imagine you worked for some rich person who said to you, hey, why don't you take some of my money and invest it for yourself to improve your future? You would be foolish not to take him up on that, right? Similarly, in Jesus' parable, he's saying that's exactly what's happening. God, who is this wealthy, owns everything, is saying to each of us, hey, I'm entrusting some things to you. Feel free to use some of those things to improve your future, your eternal future in heaven. It's the idea that you can't take it with you, but you can send it on ahead of you. He is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep. All that stuff that's in your garage, can't keep that, right? We're all going to pass on. Somebody else is going to get that. One of the great mysteries of life is, one of the great truths of life is, we spend our lives accumulating all this stuff so that one day we can die and it can become somebody else's. That doesn't make sense, but the Scripture is telling us you can use that to impact your future in heaven. You use that to somehow create friends, in other words, create people who are going to join you in the light in the future in heaven. This is one of the reasons I never felt bad when I was on staff with Campus Crusade for Christ, for example, about raising support from people and going to them and saying, hey, I've got this ministry over here. Would you like to invest financially in that, making that happen? Because I really believed I was helping people invest in kingdom activities. They were sending on some of what they have here on earth, sending it on ahead of themselves to heaven. They were, as Jesus says in other places, laying up treasures in heaven. So, how can we go about investing? Well, Matthew Henry, another great Bible commentary, said this. He said, the application of this parable and the inferences drawn from it, Jesus says, I say unto you, you my disciples, and by inference us, though you have but little in this world, consider how you may do good with that little. So if you feel like, I really don't have that much, I'm not a wealthy person. Matthew Henry is saying, though you have little in this world, consider how you may do good with that little. And a couple of ideas came to my mind that I wanted to leave you with as application. One is to give financially. This is an obvious application, but one we ought to take seriously. And if you're kind of wondering, well, where do I start? I don't believe this is law, but that this is, the law acts as a guide to us. And especially, I think, when Jesus reaffirms parts of the law, as he does in Matthew 23:23, he's speaking to some Pharisees, he says, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, a tenth of your mint and dill and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, faithfulness. And then he adds, you should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. So he's saying, you guys, you get all picky about the fact that, oh man, I get my dill and I take 1/10 of that and I give it to the church, and I get my little, spice of cumin and I take 1/10 of that. And they were showing off that, oh, look at how holy I am. But they were missing it when it came to showing justice and mercy and faithfulness. But the part that really stands out is Jesus doesn't say, the money part I don't really care about, forget that. Focus on the mercy and justice and love, No, he says, what you should have done is both. You can do both. Stop being a hypocrite. So Jesus is telling them, keep giving that 10%, but don't neglect justice and mercy and forgiveness. And I think we can use that as a place to start and as an encouragement from the Lord. The second thing that comes to mind that's maybe not quite as obvious is to seize opportunities. Many of us, even though compared to the rest of the world, we're really wealthy, many of us, we don't feel wealthy. We're just kind of holding it together. And if we did have a little extra money, we wouldn't necessarily invest it. We might do an upgrade on a car that's fallen apart, and I can totally relate to that. I understand that. So sometimes increasing our giving just isn't possible. But we all do have opportunities that we can leverage for the kingdom. Jesus said, if you visit a prisoner, if you clothe the poor, if you even take a cup of water to a child in his name, it's as if you're doing it for him, to him. You're serving him. So there are some things that we can do that are kingdom activities that really cost us almost nothing, that are ways we can seize opportunities. Here's some suggestions. Write a letter to a prisoner. It just costs you a stamp. There are places on the internet you can find people that need encouragement, prison ministries that would point you in the right direction. Buy winter coats at garage sales, and, where you can get them pennies on the dollar and donate them to Coats for the Needy type ministries. Volunteer to help at the Salvation Army, or just go and visit people who need to be visited. One of the things that we all can do, doesn't cost us anything, is just to make some room in our lives for others. I had a friend who described it like a little Lego piece. You know how some of the Lego pieces have 2 little bumps on them and you can attach 2 little things to it, and others have like 20 little bumps on it, We each, if those represent our lives and the number of relationships that we can sustain, some people are kind of loners and they can only handle maybe 2 extra, relationships. But other people are people, and they've got, 20 little bumps that they can have all these other people in their lives. Well, clear a bump, add a bump to your life and make room for some new people so that you can add those onto your life. It's amazing how just adding one relationship to your life can make a difference for that person. We've all heard the story, that there's a variety of different stories that all go kind of along the line of a kid in high school, was on his last day and he dropped his books and somebody helped him pick up his books. And 20 years later, they met at the class reunion and come to find out that the kid who dropped his books was going to commit suicide that day. But because this other kid helped him pick up his books, he realized, hey, somebody cares. And that little act of kindness gave him the strength to carry on. You never know what your acts of kindness will do. If you're a family that's got a bunch of kids, you can barely get them dressed and out the door, maybe invite another family to go to the park with you. If you're older folks, like most of us are, maybe offer to babysit some family with a bunch of kids. We've kind of weathered that storm. We know how to deal with kids. Have you got a boat? Do you like to fish? Invite some new person, that you meet here at church to go fishing with you. Guys, it's the perfect excuse to go fishing, right? So you can tell your wife, hey, Pastor said I'm supposed to take this new guy fishing, And ladies, you like to shop maybe? Perfect excuse. You can say to your husband, pastor told me I gotta go and take this new lady that I met at church, take her shopping. So there you go. Disclaimer right here. I know that it's a generality to say that men like to fish and women like to shop. Got it written down here. Many men enjoy shopping, many women enjoy fishing. This is not meant to be sexist. It's meant to communicate in a generally accepted stereotypical fashion that both men and women can use their hobbies for kingdom purposes. If there was any offense, please send all your emails to Randy Stoltenberg at hotmail.com. There you go. You get the idea. You know, we all have passions, we have hobbies, we have things we like. Hey, how'd you like to come rock hunting with me? How'd you like to go mushroom picking or, you know, whatever. You know, oftentimes a new person just wants to have a friend. Let's go to the movie or let's, you know. When I was a kid, halfway through high school, I started at a new high school. I'm driving my first day. My dad, who was not big on, you know, pearls of wisdom, said something that I remember to this day. He said, maybe I should tell you this because this might be, well, okay, I'll go ahead and tell you. But my dad said, one good way to make a friend is to ask a person to do you a favor. And I said, well, why is that? He goes, well, if you ask them to do you a favor, now they look at you as, you kind of owe me. And so they're not going to just let you just, you know, get out of their lives. And so that has worked for me often in my life where I've met somebody and, hey, could you help me? You know, I need to move a desk or something, you know. And a lot of friendships have come out of that. Well, you get the idea. It takes some thought and it takes some time, but I think you can do it and can figure out lots of different ways. And it can make a big difference to invest in the lives of other people. Again, try and make room for that one more relationship. And, you know, I'm not denying that it doesn't take discipline. Just like it takes discipline to invest that $20 a month for your whole, you know, working career, it takes discipline to say, I'm going to allow a little bit of extra time in my life, so if I meet somebody new, I've got a little buffer in my life to be able to say, hey, why don't you come to lunch? Hey, would you like to go fishing? Would you enjoy a walk in the woods? Whatever. But we need, you know, what does it say about us as Christians if we won't take the time to make room in our lives for other people? We need to do that. Well, the second thing that Jesus communicated to us and his disciples is that we can build our resume. You know, how we handle things here on earth, Jesus says in this section, will affect what our responsibilities are in eternity. Looking at Luke 16:10-11, Jesus says, whoever can be trusted with very little can be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. If you have not been trustworthy in your handling of worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And the question, of course, would be, wow, well, what are true riches? Some believe that in heaven we will have a life. You know, I can remember saying to my dad, oh man, we get to heaven, is it just going to be like singing hymns all the time for eternity? I couldn't think of anything more boring. And he said, no, there's going to be work to do and adventures to go on. Christ is going to have all kinds of amazing, you know, heaven's going to be amazing. Don't worry, son, it's not going to be boring. But a lot of, you know, if you've ever read Randy Alcorn's book on heaven, he talks about the fact that we will likely be in charge of different parts of heaven. There'll be adventures to take part in. We might be in charge of a group of people, a group of souls in heaven, kind of like being a mayor of a city of believers. That would be looking after true riches, right? Looking after people that Christ died for and loves. That I think is certainly part of what he's talking about here. But we can build our resume for heaven by how we deal with things here. And then finally, Jesus is saying that money is a kind of barometer. In Luke 16:13, he says, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." And whenever I read that, I always think of Clint Eastwood in Pale Rider, when he is a pastor, and he says to somebody who's trying to bribe him, "You can't serve both God and mammon. Mammon being money." That's my line I take away from there. That's my Clint Eastwood. Take it for what it's worth. You can only serve one master. So who's it going to be? In college we used to say, if it became illegal to be a Christian, is there enough evidence to convict you? Would the prosecuting attorney say about you, "Your Honor, this man or woman is clearly a Christian. They attend a local church where they serve, not for their own benefit, but for the benefit of others. They did child care, Your Honor." No one does child care because they like doing it. They're doing it to please God. Not only that, they gave financially. They sacrificed in their own life so they could give to the ministry. We have eyewitnesses that on more than one occasion they offered to pray for people, invited people to church, explained their faith to others, gave people Christian books and literature. They not only owned a Bible, but they studied it. And worst of all, they have said that everything they do for the glory of God. Would they say that about you, or would they say, "Well, Your Honor, yeah, they did go to church, once in a while if it was convenient, and they gave whatever they happened to have on them. They hung out with other church people, that's true, but mostly it was a social thing. They didn't pray or do anything spiritual like that. Sure, they loved the idea of Jesus, and it kind of warmed their hearts to be a part of this group of good people. But they were mostly just appearing to be Christians to fit into the group that they enjoyed." Which of those would they say? How we spend our time, the amount of prayer we put into decisions, where we invest our finances, our attitude toward work, all these can be indicators of where our heart is or who our master is. Are we in control of our lives, or are we obeying God? The shrewd manager used things he had control over to make for a better future. Jesus is comparing that to how we as believers can use the things we've been given control over to affect our future eternally. Not that our investments buy our way into heaven, but our lack of faithfulness to use what we've been given could signal a dead heart, an unrevived heart by the grace of God, and should be of great concern to us. There's a story told about a Southern businessman at the end of the Civil War who could kind of see how the war was going to end. The North was going to win. And so he quietly began to translate all of his Confederate dollars into U.S. dollars. He kept enough of the Confederate dollars around so he could pay his current bills, and buy food and clothes and stuff, but he knew where this was going. And you would look at that person and say, wise person. He knew where this was going, and he made plans to be ready when it did go, right? We know how this world is going. If nothing else, we know someday we're going to die. We just know that. It's like when your life insurance salesman says, "If you should die," I always want to say if. I don't know if you've seen the statistics, but 1 out of every 1 people die. That's just the way it is. So I'm going to die. We are all going to die. And we know that we would be considered a wise person if we began to translate our earthly dollars and opportunities into heavenly currency of some kind, right? And that's how I want to leave you today, is just to encourage you to do that. Because that's part of my role, is to say, Wake up. Like we all need sometimes. Don't you wish somebody had said that to you when you were a kid? Put that $20 a month away. You know, you'll be so glad you did when you're 65 and 70. Well, that's my message today, is to say, begin today putting away your earthly opportunities for heavenly reward. Amen? Amen? Let's pray together. Father, thank you for this word of wisdom from Jesus, who loves us enough to not let us just squander what we've been given. And it tells us that, hey, you do have a wealthy person who is allowing you to invest what he's giving you for your own eternal benefit. Wake up and do it. And Lord, I pray we would all take heed from what your Son says in this parable, and that we would live differently as a result. So Lord, we pray that all that we ask and all that we do would bring you glory. And again, we ask this in your name. Amen.